The Camino of Santiago de Compostela is one of the major attractions of northern Spain, a lengthy journey from the southern tips of France all the way to Galicia's capital that enables one to travel for religious, health, or other reasons. People come from all over the world and all walks of life to undertake the pilgrimage, hoping to get something out of it in the end, be it a clearer conscience, a closeness to God or whatever deity they happen to worship, or even just a few less pounds of lard after walking all that way. Inspired by his own son's travels, former 80s star Emilio Estevez tells us of one such journey in his own written and directed film. Tom Avery is a California ophthalmologist whose son Daniel dies when starting out the Camino. Initially journeying to the Pyrenees to collect his remains, Tom decides to instead take Daniel's ashes and finish the journey for him, and meets other pilgrims along the way as he comes to terms with his own loss and the somewhat strained relations he had with his son in life. The cast are small but very solid, with Martin Sheen in fine form as a grieving dad with a very business-like attitude to life, while as his three companions, Jorik van Wageningen is a lively and jolly Dutchman trying to lose weight in time for a relative's wedding, James Nesbitt is the eccentric, idealistic travel writer, and Deborah Kara Unger is a sassy Canadian trying to give up smoking. They play off each other really well, and you feel this genuine bond and chemistry between them as each of them helps the other overcome or face whatever brought them on the pilgrimage, and it's actually very endearing, and they're a really, really likable bunch together on screen. Now, Estevez's direction is fairly straightforward and far from innovative or experimental in any way, but he manages to adequately convey the scope and beauty of the French and Spanish landscape that lines the Camino. The misty mountains, lush fields, green hills, and arid farmland are all beautifully photographed, as are the various old pueblos, monuments, and churches the characters frequent over the course of the story. Though thankfully it doesn't quite turn into a picture postcard, as Emilio is not afraid of showing us the less pleasant aspects of the Camino, such as the rather open toilet facilities and the nature of a lot of posadas and hostels having not exactly the greatest amount of room for the number of guests that usually come. Sadly, the music by Tyler Bates is less majestic, if not utterly generic. Despite the incorporation of a few songs during the various montages of a journey, the music makes no effort to incorporate any Spanish or French characteristics into its score, and instead just feels like disposable inspirational music you could get from any throwaway TV movie. And that's a really big shame. It makes me wonder, considering how much help they got from Spanish authorities and councils making this film, why they didn't turn to a Spanish composer for this. I would have loved to hear what someone like Javier Navarrete could have brought to this project. All the same, like many journey or road trip movies, where the way needs to shine is in, well, just that. What do our characters undertake, where do they end up, and what about the experience is it that changes them? In there lies the film's greatest strength. These people, both performance and writing-wise, are really likable and engaging, and you really enjoy being in their company as they banter back and forth, and thankfully in a fairly real manner, often dwelling on little things or amusements just like real friends would. Sometimes making comments about each other's habits or little quirks they have, maybe local food or the quality of the local hostel or posada. And especially Nesbitt and Wageningen in particular just relish their comedic nature, and they play off each other really well and help to counterbalance the more serious side of the story when it comes to Unger and especially Sheen's characters. What also helps is the way is not some pompous religious sermon or lazy advertisement for the pilgrimage. It is very much a movie about life, and fittingly the paths we take when we live, and that it may not be ever too late to change them. God is occasionally discussed, but in a more general sense, as Estevez shows us all sorts of people who come on the pilgrimage and why they come. We go from the young and eager, to the faithful, to the old for whom this is tradition, to all other sorts of people who you may not think would fit the profile of pilgrims. All this works well to accentuate the journey that Tom himself undergoes as he not only finishes his son's trip, but also begins to gain a new worldview that his more entrenched mentality back at home not only led to his disconnect with his son, but indeed the ideas that have dominated most of his adult life. He's a successful doctor and country club member, but he has never truly lived or thought of the outside world in a more meaningful way. Heck, he even admits he doesn't even know what the Camino is at first. This is a notion I'm sure many people can relate to. Oftentimes, we are more concerned with the immediate than seeing the bigger picture, and in that regard, the film is a complete success at its message without being excessively heavy-handed, or obvious, or sappy, or having some silly speech in there that's to spoon-feed us the moral at the end in case we didn't get it. Now, of course, The Way does have its missteps. It is very familiar ground for these sort of inspirational journey stories and doesn't drastically deviate from the formula. And well, pretty as the countryside is, the montages do run a little long from time to time when we see our group traverse the landscape. You can only photograph Spain in so many ways before I start waiting for the plot to catch up again. However, complaining about these feels so very minor considering a film like this isn't out to break rules, but rather to inspire, and in that sense, The Way is a very satisfying watch and a trip well worth taking.